there's this thing called habit stacking that is another great life hack that comes with waking up early. And the way that I personally stack habits, there's a bunch of different ways that I stack habits throughout my day, but early on, this is a good example, is that when I go for my morning run, I also either listen to an audiobook or a podcast. What I used to do before having a family, before I had all of these responsibilities and things that I had to show up for, and when there was more certainty in the back half of my day and throughout my day, I would separately go for my run, and I would separately read a book, listen to an audiobook, listen to a podcast. I would do them separately. But after having kids, realizing that time is limited and I am responsible for managing that time, I started stacking some of these habits, some of these routines. So I now listen to an audiobook or podcast while I'm running. I have 75 minutes almost every single morning, 6 days a week, at least 75 minutes of opportunity time to learn, to educate myself, to expand my knowledge on a topic, whether that's fitness, family, business. I'll listen to sermons sometimes on my morning runs instead of an audiobook or a podcast. I can listen to an audiobook in about a week and a half right now. I can consume so much information and gain so much insight and perspective and knowledge by habit stacking. Now, I'll be honest, when I first started running and running was more challenging for me, and I'm going to use this as an example, but it's applicable to all things. Like habit stacking typically cannot be done overnight. You can't go from doing nothing to doing two things at once. When I first started running was challenging. Running was hard. Running was uncomfortable. And the entire time I was running, I was trying to fight this mental resistance to want to stop, to want to quit, to want to slow down. If I would have tried to listen to an audiobook or a podcast or anything while I was running back then, I wouldn't have consumed any of that content. It would have been background noise the entire time. I would have been so focused on the run and my breathing and the effort that I wouldn't have been able to actually digest anything that was going through my ears. But over time, you get better at one thing, you become more efficient, you can almost go into autopilot. And what started happening the more I started running, and it became easier and it wasn't as much of an effort, and I could just go into an autopilot type scenario, my brain would start wondering. I would forget I was actually running. And I would think about issues I was dealing with in terms of the business, or I think of new creative strategies to market the brand, things that I wanted to accomplish. I would just start thinking, like my brain would go all over the place. It'd be firing on all cylinders when I was running. And realizing then that I was becoming more efficient, running was becoming easier. My mental bandwidth and capacity wasn't consumed by the challenge of running, but it was going elsewhere. That's when I started exploring listening to audiobooks and podcasts and consuming content while running. And I was able to habit stack when one thing became, I don't want to say seamless, but I became more efficient at that one thing. We can't expect to be able to habit stack early on instantaneously. But as we become efficient at one thing, and I don't want to say we master it, but it becomes easier. We then can add more habits on top of that. So now my mornings are habit stacked. So it's a life hack in itself. Habit stacking, where I'm knocking two things out at once. I'm killing two birds with one stone. I am getting in my workout. I am working towards my physical fitness goals, this marathon goal. And I'm also consuming content that is helping me grow personally and professionally. That 75-minute run in the morning is some of my most productive time in my entire day. That sets the conditions. I know my kids are still asleep. I know my wife is going through her morning routine back at the house. It's still dark out. The world itself is waking up. My emails aren't blowing up. Phone isn't blowing up. There are no distractions. There's nothing pulling me out of that headspace. That time is mine. That time is for me. That time that I created, that time and space that I created is setting the conditions for a successful day. That time is certainty. I don't have to fight uncertainty. I don't have to fight disruptions or disturbances. That is my time because I created it. I'm not trying to find it later on. I created this time for me. Again, it's why it's one of the greatest life hacks that you can implement, waking up earlier.